The rain hammered against the windows of the military compound like angry fists demanding entry. Inside the war room, tension crackled through the air as thick as the cigarette smoke that curled toward the fluorescent lights. Maps covered every surface, marked with red circles and black arrows that told stories of missions gone wrong and soldiers who wouldn't be coming home. Lieutenant Marcus Rodriguez stood at attention, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. The briefing had been a disaster from start to finish. 3 months of planning, countless hours of intelligence gathering, and it had all fallen apart because someone had questioned his judgment in front of the commanding officers. Someone who had no right to speak up in his operation. The voice that had challenged him belonged to a woman. A small woman with short brown hair, pulled back in a regulation bun, wearing the same camouflage uniform as everyone else in the room. But Marcus had never seen her before, and, in his mind, she had no business being there at all. "The extraction point is compromised," she had said, her voice calm and steady despite the chaos erupting around the table. "If we proceed with Lieutenant Rodriguez's plan, we'll lose half the team before they even reach the target." Marcus had felt his face burn with embarrassment and rage. Who was this nobody to question his strategy? He'd been planning operations since before she probably even enlisted. The other officers had turned to look at him, waiting for his response, and he had felt something snap inside his chest like a rubber band stretched too far. Without thinking, without considering the consequences, Marcus had spun around and struck her across the face with the back of his hand. The sound echoed through the room like a gunshot, and suddenly, everyone was silent except for the rain still beating against the windows. The woman didn't cry out. She didn't even stumble. She simply stood there, one hand touching her cheek where a red mark was already blooming, and looked at him with eyes that held no fear, only a quiet disappointment that somehow hurt worse than anger would have. "Lieutenant Rodriguez," Colonel Hayes had barked from the head of the table. "Stand down immediately." But Marcus was beyond hearing commands. The stress of the past few months, the pressure of leading men into combat, the constant fear of making a mistake that would cost lives, it all came pouring out in that moment. All directed at this woman who had dared to make him look foolish in front of his superiors. "You don't belong here," he had snarled, his voice barely controlled. "This is a man's job, planning real operations where real soldiers die. Go back to your desk and type reports or whatever it is you people do." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the rain seemed to pause, as if the whole world was holding its breath. Marcus became aware of every person in the room staring at him, their faces a mixture of shock, disgust, and something that looked like pity. The woman straightened her shoulders and looked him directly in the eye. When she spoke, her voice was so quiet that everyone had to lean forward to hear her, but every word cut through the air like a blade. "My name is Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chun," she said, "and I've been a Navy SEAL for 8 years. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Navy SEAL. He felt the blood drain from his face as the full weight of what he had done crashed down on him. He had just struck a superior officer, a Navy SEAL, one of the most elite warriors in the entire military. Around the table, the other officers were staring at him with undisguised horror. Colonel Hayes looked like he was considering whether to have Marcus arrested on the spot or simply throw him out of the building himself. The younger lieutenants were backing away from Marcus as if his stupidity might be contagious. But it was Sarah Chin's face that would haunt his dreams for months to come. She wasn't angry. She wasn't vindictive. She looked at him the way someone might look at a child who had just broken something precious, with sadness and a kind of gentle disappointment that cut deeper than any shouting match ever could. "The extraction point is still compromised," she said simply, as if nothing had happened. "But I think we can modify the approach to minimize casualties. If the lieutenant would like to hear my suggestions." Marcus wanted to disappear. He wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. Instead, he stood there like a statue, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do anything but stare at this woman who should have been screaming at him or reporting him for assault, but instead was still trying to save the lives of his men. Colonel Hayes cleared his throat, the sound like breaking glass in the silence. "Lieutenant Rodriguez, you will report to my office immediately after this briefing. Lieutenant Commander Chun, please proceed with your assessment." For the next hour, Marcus listened as Sarah Chun calmly and methodically tore apart his operation plan and rebuilt it into something that actually had a chance of success. She spoke with the quiet authority of someone who had been behind enemy lines more times than most soldiers had been to the mess hall. Every suggestion was backed up with personal experience, real situations she had faced in combat zones around the world. She talked about the layout of similar compounds she had infiltrated in Afghanistan. She described the patrol patterns of guards based on operations she had conducted in Iraq. She knew the range and accuracy of the weapons they would face because she had used them herself. When she spoke about the risks of the mission, it wasn't theoretical. It was based on firefights she had survived, friends she had lost, split-second decisions that had meant the difference between coming home and being shipped back in a flag-draped box. Marcus found himself taking notes, despite everything. Despite the fact that he had just humiliated himself beyond repair, despite the fact that his career was probably over, despite the fact that he had struck the most qualified person in the room, he couldn't help but be impressed by her expertise. This was what real military experience looked like. This was what 8 years as a Navy SEAL taught you. Not just tactics and weapons training, but a deep understanding of human nature, of how fear affected decision-making, of how to read a situation and adapt when everything went wrong. As she spoke, Marcus began to understand just how badly he had misjudged everything. He had seen a woman in the war room and assumed she was some kind of administrative assistant who had wandered into the wrong meeting. He had let his prejudices blind him to the fact that she wore the same rank insignia as the other senior officers, that she carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to command, that when she spoke about military operations, everyone else in the room listened. The realization was like a knife twisting in his gut. He wasn't just a fool. He was the kind of fool who let his assumptions override his observation, who let his pride interfere with his judgment. The kind of fool who got people killed in combat. When the briefing finally ended, the other officers filed out of the room quickly, avoiding eye contact with Marcus as if his disgrace might rub off on them. Only Sarah Chun remained behind, gathering her papers with the same calm efficiency she had shown throughout the meeting. Marcus knew he should leave, should report to Colonel Hayes' office, and begin the process of explaining the inexplicable. But something kept his feet rooted to the floor. Some desperate need to say something, anything, that might begin to repair the damage he had done. "Ma'am," he began, his voice hoarse. I need to." She looked up at him, and for a moment he saw something in her eyes that might have been compassion. "Lieutenant," she said quietly, "I've been in the military long enough to know that good soldiers sometimes make terrible mistakes under pressure. The question isn't whether you made a mistake, it's what you do about it now." She gathered the last of her papers and moved toward the door, then paused. "Your original plan had merit," she said without turning around. "The fundamental strategy was sound. You just needed better intelligence about the ground situation. That's not a failure of leadership. That's a failure of preparation. Learn from it." And then she was gone, leaving Marcus alone in the empty war room with the rain still beating against the windows and the weight of his actions crushing down on his shoulders like a physical thing. He had struck a Navy SEAL, a superior officer, a woman who had risked her life for her country more times than he could imagine. And instead of destroying him, she had tried to save his operation and offered him advice about how to be a better leader. Marcus Rodriguez had thought he understood what honor meant. He had thought he understood what strength looked like. He had thought he understood what it meant to be a soldier. Standing alone in that war room, staring at the maps covered with plans for operations he might never be allowed to lead again, he realized he had been wrong about everything. And the person who had shown him that truth was the same person he had just assaulted based on nothing more than his own ignorance and pride. The rain continued to fall, and Marcus continued to stand there, trying to figure out how someone was supposed to live with that kind of shame, trying to figure out how to begin making amends for the unforgivable, trying to figure out if there was any way to become the kind of soldier that Sarah Chun already was, the kind who could face the worst of human behavior and respond with grace instead of violence. Outside, lightning split the sky, illuminating the compound in harsh white light for a brief moment before plunging everything back into darkness. And in that darkness, Marcus Rodriguez began to understand that his real education as a soldier was just beginning. The fluorescent lights in Colonel Hayes' office buzzed like angry insects, casting harsh shadows across the American flag that hung behind his desk. Marcus had been standing at attention for 20 minutes, staring straight ahead, while the colonel finished reading through what appeared to be his entire service record. The silence was so complete that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat drumming in his ears. Finally, Colonel Hayes closed the file with a sound like a gunshot and looked up. His face was weathered from 30 years of military service, carved with lines that spoke of difficult decisions and sleepless nights. When he looked at Marcus, there was no anger in his eyes, just a deep, bone-tired disappointment that somehow felt worse than any shouting match. "Lieutenant Rodriguez," the colonel said, his voice carefully controlled. "In my 30 years of service, I have seen soldiers do many stupid things. I have seen good men make terrible decisions under pressure. I have seen brave warriors crack under the weight of command. But what I witnessed in that war room today," he shook his head slowly, "that was something else entirely." Marcus wanted to speak, to explain, to somehow make the colonel understand that he wasn't really the kind of person who would strike a superior officer. But the words wouldn't come. How could he explain that he had let his assumptions about gender override everything he knew about military protocol? How could he justify attacking someone based on nothing more than his own prejudices? "Do you know who Lieutenant Commander Chun is?" Colonel Hayes continued. "Do you have any idea what she has accomplished in her 8 years as a SEAL?" Marcus remained silent, knowing that anything he said would only make things worse. The colonel opened another file, this one much thicker than Marcus's service record. Sarah Chun graduated at the top of her class from the Naval Academy. She was the second woman ever to complete SEAL training, and she did it with scores that ranked in the top 5% of her class. In the past 8 years, she has completed 47 classified operations across 6 different countries. Each fact hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had assumed she was inexperienced, unqualified, out of place. The reality was that she was probably the most qualified person in that room. 3 years ago, the colonel continued, she led a rescue operation in Afghanistan that saved the lives of 12 captured Marines. She spent 72 hours behind enemy lines, coordinated air support, neutralized hostile forces, and extracted every single hostage without a casualty. For that operation, she received the Silver Star. Marcus felt sick. The Silver Star was one of the highest decorations for valor in combat. It was the kind of medal that marked a soldier as truly exceptional, the kind of recognition that most service members could only dream of earning. Last year, she completed a solo reconnaissance mission in Syria that provided intelligence crucial to dismantling a major terrorist cell. She spent 3 weeks operating alone in hostile territory, gathering information that led to the capture of 17 high-value targets and the prevention of at least 4 planned attacks on American interests. The colonel closed the file and leaned back in his chair. "Lieutenant Commander Chun has more combat experience than most soldiers accumulate in an entire career. She has proven herself under fire more times than I can count. She has saved American lives and served her country with distinction and honor. And you struck her because you thought she didn't belong in a military briefing." The shame was overwhelming. Marcus felt like he might throw up. He had attacked a genuine American hero because he couldn't see past his own prejudices. "Sir," Marcus managed to croak, "I have no excuse for my actions. What I did was unforgivable." "You're right," the colonel said bluntly. "It was unforgivable. The question now is what we do about it." Marcus had been expecting immediate court-martial proceedings, a dishonorable discharge, possibly criminal charges. Instead, the colonel was talking as if there were options to consider. "Lieutenant Commander Chun has declined to press charges," the colonel said, watching Marcus's reaction carefully. "She has also declined to file a formal complaint about the incident. When I asked her why, she said that she believed you were a good soldier who had made a terrible mistake, and that destroying your career wouldn't serve any useful purpose." Marcus felt his knees go weak. Even after what he had done, Sarah Chun was still trying to protect him. The generosity of spirit that required was beyond his comprehension. However, the colonel continued, "Her recommendation does not mean there will be no consequences. What you did was witnessed by 8 other officers. It cannot be ignored or swept under the rug. You will face a formal reprimand. You will be removed from your current command position, and you will be transferred to a different unit where you can hopefully learn to be a better officer and a better human being." Marcus nodded, accepting the punishment without complaint. It was far less than what he deserved. But before any of that happens, the colonel said, "You're going to do something else. You're going to spend the next 2 weeks working directly under Lieutenant Commander Chen's supervision. You're going to learn what it means to be a real soldier. And you're going to figure out how to earn back even a fraction of the respect you threw away in that war room." The assignment was clearly intended as punishment, but Marcus found himself feeling something that might have been hope. If Sarah Chun was willing to work with him, maybe there was a chance he could somehow make amends for what he had done. She's agreed to this? He asked. She suggested it, the colonel replied. She seems to think there's something worth salvaging in you. Though for the life of me, I can't imagine what. 2 hours later, Marcus found himself in a different part of the compound, standing outside a training facility he had never visited before. The sign on the door read, Advanced Combat Training, Authorized Personnel Only. He knocked and waited, his stomach churning with anxiety. Sarah Chin opened the door, wearing training fatigues and combat boots. The red mark on her face had faded to a faint bruise, a visible reminder of his actions that made Marcus want to disappear into the ground. Lieutenant Rodriguez, she said formally, please come in. The training facility was unlike anything Marcus had seen before. It contained elaborate mock-ups of different combat environments, urban settings with false storefronts and apartment buildings, desert compounds with sand-filled courtyards, jungle terrain complete with vegetation and water obstacles. Sophisticated equipment lined the walls, including weapons he didn't recognize and communication gear that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. This is where we prepare for specialized operations, Sarah explained, her tone professional and impersonal. For the next 2 weeks, you'll be participating in advanced training exercises designed to simulate real combat scenarios. You'll learn what it actually takes to plan and execute the kind of missions you've been assigned to lead. Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The first thing you need to understand, Sarah continued, is that everything you think you know about combat is probably wrong. Classroom theory and actual battlefield experience are completely different things. Until you've been shot at by real enemies in real situations where real people die if you make mistakes, you don't truly understand what military leadership means. She led him to a table covered with equipment, body armor, weapons, communication devices, and various tools he didn't recognize. Put this on, she instructed. We're going to start with a basic infiltration exercise. As Marcus struggled into the unfamiliar gear, Sarah began explaining the scenario. You need to extract a high-value target from a hostile compound. You have limited ammunition, no backup support, and enemy patrols that change their patterns every 15 minutes. The target is injured and can't move without assistance. You have to get in, find them, and get out without being detected. If you're caught, the target dies, and your team is captured. The exercise sounded impossible. What's the success rate for this kind of operation? Marcus asked. Sarah looked at him with an expression he couldn't read. In real life? About 30%, which is why proper planning and accurate intelligence are the difference between coming home and being shipped back in a box. For the next 6 hours, Marcus failed the exercise repeatedly. He was detected by patrols. He triggered alarms. He got lost in the maze-like compound. He made noise at crucial moments. He chose wrong routes that led to dead ends. Each failure meant starting over from the beginning, and each restart drove home just how little he actually knew about the realities of combat operations. Sarah watched every attempt without comment, making notes on a clipboard but offering no advice or encouragement. She simply observed as Marcus struggled with scenarios that she had undoubtedly faced in real life, where the consequences of failure weren't just having to start over, but death. By the end of the day, Marcus was exhausted, frustrated, and humbled. He had managed to complete the exercise exactly once, and even then, only because he had gotten lucky with the timing of a patrol change. Tomorrow we'll work on urban combat scenarios, Sarah said as they cleaned the equipment. Close quarters of fighting in civilian areas where you have to identify targets while protecting non-combatants. The margin for error is even smaller. As they prepared to leave, Marcus finally found the courage to say what had been building inside him all day. Ma'am, he said quietly, I want you to know that what I did was inexcusable. I let my prejudices override my judgment, and I attacked you based on assumptions that were completely wrong. There's no justification for it, and I don't expect forgiveness. But I want you to know that I'm grateful for the chance to learn from you, even though I don't deserve it. Sarah paused in her packing and looked at him for a long moment. Lieutenant, she said finally, everyone has prejudices. Everyone makes assumptions based on incomplete information. The difference between a good soldier and a bad one isn't whether you have those prejudices. It's whether you let them control your actions and what you do when you realize you've been wrong. She shouldered her gear bag and headed for the door. See you at 0600 tomorrow. And Rodriguez, wear better boots. You're going to be doing a lot of running. As Marcus walked back to his quarters through the evening darkness, he realized that the past day had taught him more about real military leadership than the previous 6 months of his career. And he was beginning to understand that the next 2 weeks weren't just about learning combat tactics. They were about learning what it meant to be the kind of soldier who deserved to wear the uniform. The kind of soldier that Sarah-chan already was, and that he hoped he might somehow become. The alarm screamed through the darkness at 4:30 a.m., jolting Marcus from a restless sleep filled with dreams of failed missions and disappointed faces. He had been dreading this morning since the moment Sarah-chan told him to wear better boots. His feet were still covered in blisters from the previous day's exercises, and his muscles ached in places he hadn't known existed. By 5:45 a.m., he was standing outside the training facility, wearing the best boots he owned and trying to prepare himself mentally for whatever punishment Sarah had planned. She arrived precisely at 6 o'clock, carrying a large duffel bag and wearing an expression that gave nothing away. "Today we're focusing on decision-making under pressure," she announced without preamble. Real combat isn't just about physical skills. It's about making the right choices when you have incomplete information and no time to think. She led him to a new section of the training facility that Marcus hadn't seen before. This area was designed to look like a small Middle Eastern village, complete with narrow alleyways, flat-roofed buildings, and areas that could be used as either civilian spaces or enemy strongholds. "The scenario is this," Sarah began, consulting a tablet. "Intelligence reports indicate that a terrorist cell is planning an attack on American civilians. The cell leader is believed to be hiding in this village, along with several high-value weapons caches. Your mission is to locate and neutralize the threat while minimizing civilian casualties." She handed him a modified training weapon and a communication device. "The catch is that this village is populated with both hostile combatants and innocent civilians. You'll have to identify targets in real time, make split-second decisions about when to engage, and coordinate with your team while under fire." "What team?" Marcus asked, looking around the empty facility. Sarah smiled grimly. "You'll figure that out when the exercise starts." She pressed a button on her tablet, and suddenly the village came alive with sound, voices speaking in Arabic, the clatter of everyday life, children playing in the distance. "You have 30 minutes to complete the mission. Your time starts now." Marcus moved cautiously into the village, his weapon ready, but not raised. The sounds around him were disorienting. He could hear people talking, but he couldn't see anyone. Every shadow could hide an enemy. Every doorway could be a trap. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure anyone nearby could hear it. As he rounded the first corner, a figure stepped out from behind a building. For a split second, Marcus saw a man in civilian clothes reaching for something at his waist, and he nearly pulled the trigger before realizing the man was reaching for a cell phone, not a weapon. The relief was overwhelming, but it was immediately replaced by the understanding that in real combat, that hesitation could have gotten him killed. The exercise continued with one impossible decision after another. Voices called out in a language he didn't understand. Were they warnings about his presence or innocent conversations? A woman appeared in a window above him. Was she a civilian or a spotter for enemy forces? A child ran across his path. Was he simply playing or carrying a message between enemy positions? Each decision had to be made in seconds, with insufficient information and potentially lethal consequences for making the wrong choice. Marcus found himself paralyzed by the complexity of it all, standing in the middle of the fake village while scenarios played out around him that he couldn't properly interpret or respond to. Then the first simulated gunshot rang out, and everything changed. Training bullets zinged past his head, close enough that he could feel the air displacement. Suddenly, he was moving on pure instinct, diving for cover behind a concrete barrier while trying to identify where the shots were coming from. "Rodriguez!" Sarah's voice came through his communication device, but it was different now, sharper, more urgent. "Report your position." "I'm pinned down behind the market stall," he called back, realizing that she was playing the role of his backup team. Taking fire from multiple positions, can't get a clear line of sight on the shooters. "Civilians in the area?" Marcus poked his head up cautiously and immediately ducked back down as more training rounds flew past. "I count at least 3 non-combatants in the immediate area. Can't engage without risk of collateral damage. Then, you need to move. There's an alley to your north that should give you a better angle. Move in 30 seconds when I provide covering fire." The next few minutes were unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced in training. He found himself moving through the village in a complex dance of advance and retreat, try to identify and neutralize enemy positions while protecting civilians and coordinating with his team. The scenarios kept changing. Allies became enemies, civilians turned out to be combatants. What looked like safe cover turned into death traps. Through it all, Sarah's voice guided him, providing intelligence, tactical advice, and the kind of real-time support that could mean the difference between success and disaster. But Marcus was beginning to understand that she was doing far more than just playing a supporting role. She was demonstrating the level of expertise and quick thinking that real combat required. When a simulated explosive device detonated near his position, filling the air with smoke and noise, Marcus found himself disoriented and unable to determine which direction led to safety. Sarah's voice cut through the chaos with precise directions that guided him to cover. But as he followed her instructions, he realized that she somehow knew the layout of the village better than he did, despite the fact that this was supposedly his mission. "How do you know where everything is?" he asked during a brief lull in the action. "Because I helped design this training scenario," Sarah replied. "Based on a real village in Iraq where I spent 3 weeks hunting down an actual terror cell. Every detail of this exercise comes from real experience." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. He wasn't just struggling with a theoretical training exercise. He was failing at a mission that Sarah had successfully completed in real life, under actual combat conditions where real people would have died if she had made the mistakes he was making. The exercise continued, and gradually Marcus began to understand the layers of complexity involved in real military operations. It wasn't enough to be physically capable or tactically sound. You had to read situations correctly, make moral decisions under pressure, coordinate with your team, adapt to changing circumstances, and do it all while people were shooting at you. By the time the exercise ended, Marcus was exhausted, humbled, and deeply shaken. He had completed the basic objectives, but barely, and only with constant guidance from Sarah. In real combat, with real consequences, he would have gotten people killed. "Debrief time," Sarah announced, leading him to a small room adjoining the training facility. She pulled up video footage of his performance on a large monitor, and Marcus watched himself stumble through the exercise with growing embarrassment. "What do you see?" Sarah asked. "I see someone who has no business leading combat operations," Marcus answered honestly. "That's a start," Sarah replied. "But look deeper. What specific decisions cause problems?" For the next hour, they went through the exercise step by step. Sarah pointed out moments where Marcus had hesitated when he should have acted when he should have waited, missed obvious tactical opportunities, and failed to consider the broader implications of his choices. But she also highlighted moments where he had done well, times when his instincts had been correct, when he had adapted quickly to changing circumstances, when he had shown genuine concern for civilian safety, even at cost to the mission. "The difference between a good soldier and a great one," Sarah explained, "isn't that great soldiers don't make mistakes. It's that they learn from their mistakes faster, and they understand the real consequences of their decisions." She pulled up another video, this one showing footage from an actual military operation. Marcus watched as a team of soldiers moved through terrain similar to what they had just trained in, but everything about their movement was different, more efficient, more coordinated, more purposeful. "This is footage from the operation in Iraq that I based today's exercise on," Sarah said. "Watch how the team leader makes decisions." Marcus studied the video carefully. The team leader. He realized it was Sarah, though the footage was grainy and taken from a distance, moved with a confidence and efficiency that made Marcus's performance look clumsy by comparison. Every decision seemed to flow naturally from the previous one, as if she could see several steps ahead in a complex game that Marcus was only beginning to understand. "How do you learn to think like that?" Marcus asked. "Practice," Sarah replied simply. "Lots of practice and lots of failures in training, so you don't fail when it really matters. But mostly it comes from understanding that every decision you make affects real people. When you truly internalize that responsibility, you start making better choices." She turned off the monitor and looked at Marcus directly. "You asked me yesterday why I didn't press charges against you for what happened in the war room. Want to know the real reason?" Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "Because I've seen what happens to soldiers who let their prejudices override their judgment in real combat situations. I've seen good men get people killed because they couldn't see past their assumptions about who belonged on their team and who didn't. And I've seen how that guilt destroys them afterward. She paused, as if deciding how much to share. There was a soldier on one of my first deployments, a sergeant who couldn't accept that a woman could be his equal in combat. He refused to follow tactical advice from the female officers, insisted on doing things his own way, wouldn't coordinate properly with the mixed-gender teams. His prejudices got 2 Marines killed in an ambush that could have been avoided. The story hit Marcus like a punch to the stomach. He could easily imagine himself in a similar situation, making the same kinds of mistakes based on the same kinds of assumptions. What happened to him? He was discharged, but the damage was done. Last I heard, he was drinking himself to death in some small town, unable to live with what his prejudices had cost. I decided that if I ever had the chance to prevent something like that from happening again, I would try. Sarah stood up, gathering her materials. That's why you're here, Rodriguez. Not as punishment, but as prevention. You have the potential to be a good soldier, but only if you learn to see past your assumptions and understand what real military leadership requires. As they prepared to leave, Sarah handed Marcus a thick manual titled Advanced Combat Leadership Principles. Read chapters 4 through 7 tonight, she instructed. Tomorrow we're going to work on team coordination under fire. It's going to be even more challenging than today. Walking back to his quarters in the evening light, Marcus realized that the past 2 days had changed something fundamental in his understanding of what it meant to serve. He had thought he was already a soldier, but now he understood that he had only been playing at being one. Real soldiering, the kind that Sarah Chan embodied, required a level of skill, judgment, and moral courage that Marcus was only beginning to comprehend. And he was starting to understand that learning those qualities might be the most important education of his life. Marcus spent the night reading the Combat Leadership Manual, staying awake until nearly 3 a.m. studying chapters that described scenarios he had never imagined. The sections on moral decision-making under fire and leading diverse teams in combat felt like they had been written specifically for him, addressing every assumption and prejudice that had led to his disgraceful behavior in the war room. When his alarm went off at 4:30 a.m., he felt like he had barely slept, but his mind was buzzing with new concepts and perspectives. The manual had opened his eyes to the complexity of real military leadership in ways that his previous training had never touched. Sarah was waiting for him at the training facility with 3 other soldiers Marcus didn't recognize, 2 men and 1 woman, all wearing the same specialized combat gear that marked them as elite troops. Today you're going to learn about team dynamics, Sarah announced. Meet Sergeant Maria Santos, Corporal David Kim, and Staff Sergeant James Mitchell. They're going to be your team for today's exercise. Marcus nodded to each of them, immediately noting that Sergeant Santos outranked him. Another test of his ability to work with female superior officers, he realized. The previous Marcus might have resented the arrangement, but after 2 days of training with Sarah, he was beginning to understand that competence had nothing to do with gender. The scenario is a rescue mission, Sarah continued, consulting her tablet. A Navy pilot has been shot down behind enemy lines. Intelligence suggests she's being held in a fortified compound approximately 2 kilometers from here. Your team needs to infiltrate the compound, locate and extract the pilot, and reach the extraction point within 4 hours. She handed Marcus a detailed map and a communication device. Rodriguez, your team leader for this exercise. Your success depends entirely on how well you coordinate with your team and utilize their individual strengths. As the team moved out toward the target area, Marcus began to understand why Sarah had chosen these particular soldiers. Each of them had specialized skills that would be crucial to the mission's success, but only if he could figure out how to use their talents effectively. Sergeant Santos turned out to be an expert in communications and electronic warfare. As they approached the compound, she was able to intercept enemy radio traffic and provide real-time intelligence about guard positions and patrol schedules. But her expertise only became valuable when Marcus learned to listen to her assessments and incorporate them into his tactical planning. Corporal Kim was a demolitions specialist who could breach obstacles and create diversions, but his skills required careful coordination with the rest of the team's movements. Staff Sergeant Mitchell was a sniper whose marksmanship could neutralize threats from a distance, but only if Marcus could position him correctly and provide adequate cover. The first hour of the mission was a disaster. Marcus tried to lead the team the way he had always imagined leadership worked, giving orders and expecting immediate compliance. But specialized operations required constant communication, adaptation, and trust between team members. His rigid approach created confusion and missed opportunities. When they reached the perimeter of the compound, Marcus made a series of tactical errors that would have gotten them all killed in real combat. He failed to coordinate properly with Sergeant Santos, missing crucial intelligence about a hidden guard post. He positioned Corporal Kim incorrectly, preventing him from providing the diversions that could have facilitated their infiltration. He gave Staff Sergeant Mitchell unclear instructions about target priorities, leaving the sniper unable to provide effective cover. "Stop!" Sarah's voice came through their communication devices after Marcus had led the team into what would have been certain death for the third time. "Reset and try again." "Rodriguez, what went wrong?" Marcus looked at his team members, all of whom were watching him with expressions ranging from patient to frustrated. "I wasn't listening to my team," he admitted. "I was giving orders instead of coordinating." "And why do you think that happened?" The answer came to Marcus suddenly, with uncomfortable clarity. "Because I was more concerned about looking like a leader than actually being one. I was afraid that asking for input would make me seem weak." "Try again," Sarah instructed. "This time, remember that your job isn't to know everything. It's to make sure your team can do what they do best." The second attempt was dramatically different. Instead of issuing orders, Marcus began each phase of the operation by asking his team for their assessment of the situation. Sergeant Santos provided detailed intelligence about enemy positions and communication patterns. Corporal Kim identified the best locations for creating diversions and breaching obstacles. Staff Sergeant Mitchell analyzed sight lines and target opportunities. Marcus found that when he actually listened to his team members and incorporated their expertise into his planning, the mission became not only possible, but elegant in its execution. Each team member's skills complemented the others, creating opportunities that none of them could have achieved alone. When they finally reached the building where the pilot was supposedly being held, Marcus faced his biggest test yet. The structure was more heavily defended than their intelligence had suggested, with multiple guards and what appear to be booby traps around the entrances. "What do you think?" Marcus asked his team, studying the building through binoculars. "The front entrance is definitely trapped," Corporal Kim observed. "But I can see a service entrance on the north side that might be more accessible. Give me 15 minutes, and I can disable the electronic security systems." "There are at least 6 guards in the immediate area," Staff Sergeant Mitchell added. "But 3 of them follow a predictable patrol pattern. If we time it right, I can neutralize the stationary guards while you breach the building." "Radio chatter suggests they're planning to move the prisoner within the next hour," Sergeant Santos reported. "We have a narrow window before this becomes impossible." Marcus considered their options, weighing the risks against the time constraints. In the past, he would have made a quick decision based on his own limited analysis. Now he found himself thinking about how each team member's skills could be integrated into a coordinated plan. "Kim, start working on the security systems," he decided. "Mitchell, get into position to provide cover. Priority targets are the guards nearest the north entrance. Santos, monitor their communications, and let us know immediately if anything changes. I'll coordinate the breach once Kim has the security down." The plan worked with a precision that surprised Marcus. Each team member executed their role perfectly, and the coordination between them allowed for adjustments and adaptations that a more rigid approach would never have permitted. When they located the captured pilot, an actress playing the role, but convincingly injured and disoriented, Marcus realized that the mission was far from over. Getting into the compound had been difficult, but getting out with an injured person who couldn't move quickly would require even more careful coordination. "Santos, what's the enemy response looking like?" he asked. "They know we're here," she reported grimly. "Radio traffic indicates they're mobilizing additional forces. We probably have 10 minutes before this place is swarming with hostiles. Kim, can you create a diversion to draw them away from our extraction route?" "Already on it," Kim replied, setting charges that would create confusion and misdirection. "Mitchell, we're going to need mobile cover as we move toward the extraction point. Can you provide overwatch?" "Roger that. I'll leapfrog positions to keep you covered." The extraction was a running firefight through terrain that changed constantly as enemy forces tried to cut off their escape. Marcus found himself making split-second decisions based on input from his team adapting the plan in real time as circumstances changed. But the most important realization came when Sergeant Santos was simulated as being wounded during the firefight. Marcus's first instinct was to take charge of her responsibilities himself, but he quickly understood that trying to do her job and his own would compromise the entire team's effectiveness. Instead, he redistributed her duties among the other team members and adjusted their tactics to account for her reduced capabilities. It was a lesson in leadership that no classroom could have taught, the understanding that real strength sometimes means accepting limitations and finding ways to succeed despite them. When they finally reached the extraction point, Marcus was exhausted but exhilarated. For the first time since beginning this training, he felt like he had actually succeeded at something meaningful. "Debrief," Sarah announced, as the team gathered to review their performance. But this time, the feedback wasn't just from Sarah. Each team member offered their perspective on what had worked and what could have been improved. Marcus listened to criticism that was direct but constructive, delivered by soldiers who clearly respected his willingness to learn and adapt. "You did something today that many officers never learn," Sergeant Santos told him. "You trusted your team's expertise and used it effectively. That's the difference between a leader and just someone with rank." The second attempt was completely different from the first, Corporal Kim added. It was like working with a different person. Someone who understood that leadership is about enabling others, not controlling them. Staff Sergeant Mitchell, who had said very little during the exercise, offered perhaps the most meaningful feedback. "I'd follow you into combat, Lieutenant. That's not something I'd say lightly." As the team dispersed, Sarah walked with Marcus back toward the main facility. "How do you feel about today's exercise?" she asked. Marcus thought carefully before answering. "Like I learned something important about what leadership actually means. And like I have a lot more to learn before I'm ready for real responsibility." "That's exactly the right attitude," Sarah replied. "The most dangerous officers are the ones who think they already know everything they need to know. The best ones understand that learning never stops." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, and Marcus found himself thinking about the transformation he had undergone in just a few days. The person who had struck Sarah Chan in the war room seemed like a stranger now, someone whose prejudices and insecurities had made him dangerous to the people he was supposed to lead. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said eventually. "Of course. When you're going through SEAL training, how did the other soldiers treat you? Did you face the kind of prejudice and skepticism that I showed you?" Sarah considered the question for a long moment. "Every day," she said finally, "from fellow trainees, from instructors, from officers who thought I was a political correctness experiment that would eventually fail. The assumption was always that I was physically weaker, emotionally unstable, and fundamentally unsuited for combat. How did you deal with it?" "By being better," Sarah replied simply. "Better prepared, better trained, better at everything that mattered. And by understanding that their prejudices were their weakness, not mine. Every time someone underestimated me because of their assumptions, it gave me an advantage." Marcus felt a deep sense of shame as he realized how many times his own prejudices had probably caused him to underestimate people who might have been valuable allies or teachers. "The hardest part," Sarah continued, "wasn't proving myself to people who doubted me. It was maintaining my own confidence when everyone around me was expecting me to fail. It would have been easy to start believing that maybe they were right, that maybe I didn't belong." "What kept you going?" "The understanding that representation matters. Every woman who serves successfully makes it easier for the next one. Every barrier that gets broken down creates opportunities for others. And the knowledge that the mission, protecting American lives and interests, is more important than anyone's personal prejudices." As they reached the main facility, Sarah handed Marcus another manual, this one focused on inclusive leadership in combat environments. "Read chapters 2, 5, and 8 tonight," she instructed. "Tomorrow is your final exercise. It's going to test everything you've learned this week." Walking back to his quarters, Marcus realized that his education had been about much more than military tactics and leadership techniques. He had learned something fundamental about seeing people clearly, about recognizing expertise regardless of where it came from, and about the kind of moral courage required to challenge his own assumptions. The question now was whether he could carry those lessons forward into his future service, and whether he could become the kind of leader who brought out the best in everyone under his command. The final day of training dawned gray and overcast with storm clouds gathering on the horizon that seemed to match Marcus's nervous energy. He had spent another nearly sleepless night studying the manual on inclusive leadership, absorbing concepts that challenged everything he thought he had known about military command structure and team dynamics. When he arrived at the training facility at 0600, he found Sarah waiting with a larger group than he had seen before. 8 soldiers representing different branches of service and a mix of ranks, genders, and ethnicities. The diversity was clearly intentional, and Marcus understood immediately that his final test would be about leading a team that challenged every assumption he might still harbor. "This is your final exercise," Sarah announced, her tone more formal than it had been in previous days. "You'll be leading a joint task force on a complex mission that will require coordination between different military specialties and perfect cooperation between team members who may have never worked together before." She handed him a detailed briefing packet. "The scenario is a terrorist attack on an American embassy. Multiple hostiles have taken control of the building and are holding both embassy staff and visiting dignitaries hostage. Intelligence suggests they have explosives and are planning to execute hostages if their demands aren't met. Your team has 4 hours to plan and execute a rescue operation." Marcus opened the briefing packet and immediately understood why Sarah had saved this exercise for last. The scenario was incredibly complex, involving not just tactical considerations, but also diplomatic sensitivities, international law, media concerns, and the kind of split-second moral decisions that could affect foreign policy for years to come. "Your team includes Army Rangers, Navy SEALs, Air Force Special Operations, Marine Corps Force Recon, and specialized support personnel," Sarah continued. "Each branch has different training, different protocols, and different approaches to problem solving. Your job is to create a unified plan that utilizes everyone's strengths while minimizing inter-service conflicts." As Marcus studied the faces of his team members, he realized that several of them outranked him significantly. Leading this group would require a completely different approach than anything he had practiced before. He couldn't rely on rank or authority. He would have to earn their respect and cooperation through competence and inclusive leadership. The team included Master Chief Petty Officer Lisa Rodriguez, a Navy SEAL with 15 years of experience, Captain Michael Thompson, an Army Ranger who had led dozens of successful operations, Staff Sergeant Patricia Williams, an Air Force Combat Controller who specialized in coordinating air support, Gunnery Sergeant Carlos Martinez, a Marine sniper with an impeccable service record, and several other specialists whose expertise Marcus would need to understand and integrate quickly. First, introductions. Marcus began, drawing on everything he had learned about team building over the past week. "I know we come from different services with different approaches, but for the next 4 hours, we're one team with one mission. I want to hear from each of you about what you bring to this operation and what you need from the rest of us to be effective." The introductions revealed a wealth of experience and expertise that was both exciting and intimidating. Master Chief Rodriguez had participated in similar hostage rescue operations in 3 different countries. Captain Thompson had extensive experience with urban warfare and building clearing techniques. Staff Sergeant Williams could coordinate precision air support that would be crucial if the situation escalated. But the introductions also revealed potential areas of conflict. Different services had different standard operating procedures, different communication protocols, and different philosophies about risk management. Marcus realized that his first job will be to find common ground and create shared objectives that everyone could commit to. "Based on what I've heard," Marcus said after everyone had spoken, "it sounds like we have all the skills necessary to succeed, but we need to make sure we're coordinating effectively. I want to propose that we plan this operation in phases, with each phase utilizing different team members' primary expertise." He moved to a whiteboard and began sketching out the embassy layout. Phase 1 is intelligence gathering and perimeter security. Phase 2 is entry and initial assault. Phase 3 is hostage location and extraction. Phase 4 is securing the area and ensuring all threats are neutralized. "What about contingencies?" Master Chief Rodriguez asked. "Embassy operations are notorious for unexpected complications." "That's exactly what I want to discuss," Marcus replied. "I want each of you to wargame potential problems in your area of expertise and propose solutions. Then, we'll integrate those contingencies into our overall plan. For the next 2 hours, the team engaged in the most sophisticated planning session Marcus had ever participated in. Each member contributed detailed analysis based on their experience, and Marcus found himself learning more about real military operations than he had in months of conventional training. Captain Thompson identified potential structural weaknesses in the embassy building that could be exploited for entry, but also might compromise the building's integrity if explosives were used incorrectly. Staff Sergeant Williams calculated precise coordination requirements for air support that would provide cover without endangering hostages. Gunnery Sergeant Martinez analyzed sightlines and identified optimal positions for overwatch and sniper support. But the most valuable contributions came when team members challenged each other's assumptions and proposed alternatives that no single service branch would have considered. The diversity of perspectives that Marcus had once seen as a complication turned out to be the team's greatest strength. Marines are trained to be direct and aggressive, Gunnery Sergeant Martinez explained when discussing entry strategies, but SEALs are trained to be subtle and patient. For this mission, we probably need both approaches at different phases. Air Force protocols emphasize precision and minimal collateral damage, Staff Sergeant Williams added, but Army approaches focus on overwhelming force and rapid conclusion. We need to find a balance that serves the mission objectives. Marcus realized that his role wasn't to choose between different approaches, but to find ways to integrate them into a comprehensive strategy that was stronger than any single service's methodology. It required a level of intellectual humility and collaborative leadership that challenged him in ways he had never experienced. When they moved from planning to execution, Marcus faced his greatest test yet. The simulated embassy was a complex, multi-story structure with multiple entry points, interior obstacles, and areas where hostiles and hostages were intermixed. Success would require split-second coordination between team members operating in different parts of the building simultaneously. Remember, Marcus said as the team prepared to begin the operation, communication is everything. I need constant updates on your status, immediate reports of any changes in the situation, and quick coordination when we need to adapt the plan. The mission began with Master Chief Rodriguez leading a stealth infiltration through a service entrance, while Captain Thompson's team created a diversion at the main entrance. Marcus coordinated between the two efforts, ensuring that their timing complemented rather than compromised each other's effectiveness. As the operation progressed, Marcus found himself managing information flows and making decisions at a pace that required complete trust in his team members' expertise. When Staff Sergeant Williams reported that air support was available but would require precise coordination to avoid civilian casualties, Marcus had to weigh multiple factors instantly. The tactical advantage of additional firepower against the risk of collateral damage, and the international implications of using military force against a diplomatic facility. Williams, what's your confidence level on precision targeting in this environment? Marcus asked. 95% accuracy within designated target zones, she replied immediately. But only if ground forces can provide clear target identification and maintain safe distances. Rodriguez, can your team mark hostile positions clearly enough for air support? Affirmative, but we'll need 30 seconds for each target designation. Thompson, can your team maintain suppressing fire to keep hostiles in position during targeting? Roger that, as long as we don't have to worry about friendly fire from above. The coordination required was incredibly complex, but Marcus discovered that when he trusted his team members' expertise and focused on facilitating communication between them, the mission began to flow with an efficiency he had never imagined possible. The turning point came when the team encountered an unexpected complication. Additional hostiles in a section of the building that intelligence had reported as clear. The situation required immediate adaptation of their plan and redistribution of resources. New contacts in the East Wing, Gunnery Sergeant Martinez reported. At least 4 additional hostiles, armed and positioned to threaten hostages if we proceed with the original extraction plan. Marcus felt the familiar spike of adrenaline and pressure that had led to poor decisions in the past, but this time he had tools and perspective that allowed him to respond more effectively. Options, he asked, opening the decision-making to the team. I can reposition for clear shots on the new contacts, Martinez offered, but it will take 3 minutes and leave the west approach temporarily uncovered. My team can adapt our approach to cover the west side, Rodriguez suggested, but we'll need Thompson's team to adjust their timing. Air support could neutralize the new contacts, Williams added, but not without significant risk to the hostages in that section. Marcus considered the options, weighing the risks and benefits of each approach against the overall mission objectives. In the past, he would have made a quick decision based on limited information and hoped for the best. Now he understood the value of taking those extra seconds to consider all perspectives. Martinez, take your reposition, but coordinate timing with Rodriguez's team movement. Williams, keep air support on standby, but don't engage unless we have a clear emergency. Thompson, can your team provide mobile cover for both approaches? Affirmative, came the replies, and Marcus watched as his team adapted to the new situation with a fluidity that spoke to both their individual competence and their growing trust in each other. The mission concluded successfully, with all hostages rescued and all hostile threats neutralized. But, more importantly for Marcus, it had been accomplished through genuine teamwork that utilized every team member's strengths while minimizing their individual limitations. During the debrief, Sarah asked the team members to evaluate Marcus's leadership, and their responses represented a transformation that Marcus could hardly believe. He listened, Master Chief Rodriguez said simply. Too many officers think leadership means having all the answers. Rodriguez understood that leadership means helping your team find the best answers. He adapted, Captain Thompson added. When the situation changed, he didn't try to force the original plan. He trusted us to help him create a better one. He included everyone, Staff Sergeant Williams observed. Different services often compete instead of collaborating. He found ways to make our differences into advantages. As the team dispersed, Sarah walked with Marcus toward Colonel Hayes' office for his final evaluation. They walked in silence for several minutes, both processing what had just occurred. How do you feel? Sarah asked finally. Marcus considered the question carefully. Like I understand something about leadership that I didn't understand a week ago. Like I've learned the difference between commanding people and serving them. And how do you feel about working with diverse teams in the future? Like I finally understand why diversity makes teams stronger instead of weaker. Like I've been missing out on opportunities my whole career because of assumptions I didn't even know I was making. They paused outside Colonel Hayes' office, and Sarah turned to face him. Marcus, she said, using his first name for the first time, I want you to know that what happened in that war room a week ago doesn't define who you are as a soldier or as a person. What defines you is what you choose to do with what you've learned. Marcus felt tears gathering in his eyes, though he tried to maintain his composure. I want to apologize again for what I did. Not just the physical act, but for all the assumptions and prejudices that led to it. I was wrong about everything. Apology accepted, Sarah replied. But, more importantly, you've proven that you can grow and change. That's not something everyone is capable of. She extended her hand for a handshake that felt like the beginning of a new understanding rather than the end of a punishment. I hope we have a chance to work together again in the future, Lieutenant. I think you're going to be the kind of officer that people will want to serve under. As Marcus entered Colonel Hayes' office for his final evaluation, he carried with him not just new knowledge about military tactics and leadership techniques, but a fundamental shift in his understanding of what it meant to serve with honor. He had learned that true strength came from inclusion rather than exclusion, that real leadership required humility rather than arrogance, and that the best soldiers were those who could see past their prejudices to recognize excellence wherever it appeared. The rain that had been threatening all morning finally began to fall as he closed the office door behind him. But for the first time in a week, Marcus felt like the storm clouds in his life were finally beginning to clear.